Hello! Welcome to Changeling Cast, the podcast dedicated to reading and dissecting urban fantasy, paranormal, and speculative romance series. I'm your host, Mara, from the YouTube channel Books Like Whoa, and we are kicking off Season 1 with Nalini Singh's Psy-Changeling series. So welcome everybody. As I said, my name is Mara, and I do have an existing kind of presence here on the bookish internet as the YouTube channel / booktube channel Books Like Whoa. I have been doing booktube for about 3.5 years now, I think, and I really enjoy it. It's one of my favorite kind of pastimes that I have going, and I am just a big old book nerd. That's the long and the short of it. I am an omnivore in my reading taste, so I definitely read pretty much every genre, I guess. I'm trying to think if there's anything I just like straight up won't read. I don't think so. I think I'll read pretty much anything. I'm well known for my love of classics, actually. I'm trying to think of, like, analytics-wise, what my most viewed content tends to be. I think it has to do with, like, kind of literary classics, mystery, especially Agatha Christie. Agatha Christie is my favorite author, and I've done a lot of kind of deep reading projects of her various series. We'll come back to that later. And then romance is kind of the other big topic that I'm known for. I actually ended up doing my master's thesis thing, looking at romance, kind of the intersection between romance and religion. So I have written a lot about romance, and I am definitely a passionate kind of advocate for it being destigmatized as a legitimate thing that people enjoy reading. And, you know, subsidizing the rest of the book publishing industry. So it's an important genre. So that's kind of who I am. And I am kicking off with this episode, a podcast. So I love podcasts. I have been listening to podcasts basically since they've been a thing. I was an early adapter of the form because I don't know, especially when I'm walking around doing chores or like taking a walk or, you know, out shopping or whatever, I like to either be listening to an audiobook or a podcast. And my kind of first genre that I enjoyed in podcasts was book-related podcasts. Does anybody remember the Bookerageous podcast back when that was a thing? I love the Slate Book Club when that was poppin'. I liked all of the early book podcasts, and then, you know, over time I've, you know, kind of risen and fallen with various ones. I like Book Fight, I like Literary Disco, and of late I've been very much enjoying some romance podcasts, which are kind of what have directly inspired this very podcast you are listening to right now. And basically, I have been doing booktube for 3.5 years. Like I said, I still really enjoy doing it, but I am always looking to sort of challenge myself creatively. And I was kind of thinking about what a fun project for 2021 could be in terms of my kind of online bookish content. And I thought that maybe it would be a good time to try doing a podcast because I listened to and very much enjoyed 2 podcasts last year. One was Fated Mates. I still am listening to that. Obviously, it's a great ongoing podcast, but I really enjoyed their first season where they did a deep dive into Cresley Cole's Immortals After Dark series. That was a great companion because I ended up doing kind of a reading vlog project of that series. So I really enjoyed that. And then when I went on a deep dive with the Ice Planet Barbarian series at the end of 2020, I also found Ice Planet Podcast during that. And I've been enjoying catching up with that. And from there, I think between listening to that and also just kind of in my YouTube content thinking, I would like to have another series that I could do a real deep dive on, because at the beginning of my channel, I did 2 big reading projects with Agatha Christie. I did something I called Project Poirot, where I read every Poirot book and short story and everything in chronological order, or I guess the order of publication, I should say. And then I did the same thing for the Miss Marple series. I really enjoyed having that as a regular reading project. I know that a lot of my audience really enjoyed that, and it was a way that a lot of them even found me. And I've been looking for another series that I could do a similar kind of analysis with. And so I've been looking for something that I thought merited that kind of deep dive into each book. I also, though, when I was thinking about it, realized a lot of what I did in those projects really would have worked just fine as an audio form, rather than, you know, having kind of a video. So rather than taking on another video project on a semi-regular basis, because it does involve a little bit more work in terms of editing, in terms of me actually having to look, somewhat presentable on camera. Right now I'm sitting in my sweats and looking pretty messy here on a Sunday afternoon. So that kind of project, if I could do it with a podcast, would just require less work for me, and it would give me a chance to kind of fulfill a longtime dream, which is to have a podcast, because I have just loved them for so long. So with that combined, I also realized that I've been sort of wanting to do a reread of the Nalini Singh Psy-Changeling series. So I thought all of these factors together kind of point towards a podcast of me doing a very detailed deep dive rereading project, really, of Nalini Singh's Psy-Changeling series would be a great way to go. And I'm calling this Changeling Cast. Obviously, that's an allusion to Psy-Changeling, but my thought is I'm calling this tentatively season 1, and I'm going to leave the door open for possibly other series that have some kind of changeling element to them, be it a shapeshifter kind of like where situation, which is what we have in this series and in many speculative romance, speculative fiction series. But changeling also can refer to fae, so I figured that that kind of opens the door up to also potentially doing a read through of a series that has fae. So I figured this would be a specific enough mission statement for this first season that we, pretty focused on a specific goal as a podcasting nation. I don't know, what do we call this relationship between podcasters and the listeners? Between us, I think we can stay on track. But I think in the future, if this is something I enjoy, if this is something, that you guys enjoy and get some traction, then we also have room to do different series in the future. Maybe I could do like a mini series with just like the Alona Andrews Innkeeper series, because there's definitely a shifter in that one. I don't know. Anyway, I think that this, hopefully is specific but broad at the same time. Part of why I picked Psy-Changeling is that I do think that this is a series that merits a pretty close read, just based on how much is going on with it in terms of the actual plot beats, the interesting world building, and how all of the political machinations come together. And then also, I think that there's a lot of genuinely interesting thematic content happening in a lot of these books. And then on top of that, there's also some, like sexy werewolves and, sexy psychic dudes. So I think it really has everything I look for. There's often some kind of sort of either suspense, thriller, or mystery type plot engine. And I will say that if I'm, kind of describing my ideal book, my favorite kind of book is set in some sort of speculative world. There's a mystery plot engine or a thriller plot engine in terms of sort of the type of story being told. And then there is a strong romantic element. And I would say that this is pretty heavy on the romance, but that works for me in this case. And aside from that, I would say that this series definitely falls under kind of that rubric of what I really enjoy. I first read this series back it would have been in 2015. It was right after I graduated from grad school. I was unemployed. I was looking for a job, kind of because actually I spent a lot of that fall just binge reading this series and catching up with it. I could not put it down. I mean, I basically would like read a book a day, and then like along with that, I would do job hunting until I caught up. It was a very delightful binging experience. And so I think I have very fond memories of this series purely from just a like, thank you for helping me get through this kind of difficult time in my life perspective. So I have a lot of nostalgic joy with it. But I've kept up with it since. And I feel like, I think we're like 19 or 20 books in and it's still going really strong. The next book comes out in July of this year, July of 2021. And it started in, I believe, 2006. So it's been going strong for 15 years. I think that the books are still really good and doing interesting things with the characters and with the world. So I think that this is going to be a worthy project. So today we're going to talk, now that I've kind of explained who I am and why I'm doing this, today we're going to talk about who Nalini Singh is, who the author is, because she's a goddess. I'm going to give you a background on what the series is. I'm going to give you the pitch of why I think you should read the series if you haven't. talk about some of the high level themes that I find interesting going into the project, and then also just sort of a little bit of housekeeping of how I see this season of the podcast going. And I should note, I actually purposely decided to record this before I'd started any rereading. So I'm going into this with my recollections. So I think that will be part of the fun of this, is maybe potentially having my recollections corrected over the course of this reading project. So with that being said, let's start with who Nalini Singh is. She is a pretty prolific author who I've been enjoying for about 6 years now, I guess. But she's been writing for longer than that. She's been writing since 2002. She was born in Fiji, but raised in New Zealand, so she's a Kiwi. She spent 3 years living and working in Japan, and she's also traveled extensively around Asia in general. She is of South Asian descent. She's been a lawyer, a librarian, a candy factory general hand, a bank pimp, and an English teacher. So she's very well rounded in terms of just sort of her life experiences, I feel like. And I now, like, when I was doing some research on her for this, I do feel like I have a better sense kind of where she's coming from and kind of why her books are the way they are. But anyway, so her first book is called Desert Warrior, and it's a category that was published by Silhouette Desire in 2002. And on her website, she says, "I've been writing for as long as I can remember. All of my stories held a thread of romance, even when I was writing about a prince who could shoot lasers out of his eyes. Creating unique characters and giving them happy endings is my favorite thing. I even love the voices in my head, so there's no other job I'd rather be doing. I hope to continue living the dream until I keel over of old age on my keyboard." Which, hey, if you found something you love doing and you're as good at it as she is, more power to you. Some of her favorite writers and books, just to give you a sense of sort of where she's coming from influence-wise, that I saw her mention are Mercedes Lackey, the Pern books by Anne McCaffrey, Anne Bishop, Patricia Briggs. She mentioned Othello by Shakespeare, which I thought was an interesting allusion. Also, the In Death books by J.D. Robb, which, if you guys have any familiarity with my love of J.D. Robb / Nora Roberts, once I saw this, I was like, oh, I do definitely see the influence of the In Death series on Psy-Changeling for sure. Simple Jest by Pamela Morrissey, which I thought was an interesting, if you've read that book, I thought that was an interesting note. Demon Moon by Mel Jean Brooke, who I love, and Magic Strikes by Alona Andrews. And Alona Andrews is my favorite currently writing author, so that made me happy to see. And then just also a shout out to the fact that she writes a lot, and she's written a lot of different kinds of books. So she definitely has gotten her start within the romance genre. So like I mentioned, she started off with categories and contemporary. She also currently has a self-published contemporary series going that I always call the Rock series, that are set in New Zealand, kind of surrounding this rugby family, which is a series I enjoy. She also has a currently running a speculative series called the Guild Hunters series, which I know there are some people who prefer the Guild Hunters over Psy-Changeling. I personally definitely prefer Psy-Changeling over Guild Hunters, just because for me, the Guild Hunters series does have sort of an episodic structure in terms of having a different couple in every book, kind of, but it keeps going back to a main couple, and that main couple I don't really love. Like, they're fine, but I don't love them. So it's an interesting world. It's basically, instead of playing Psy-Changeling series, the main kind of characters are either wares, humans, or Psy, which are sort of like psychically gifted race. But in Guild Hunters, it's angels and vampires. And she also has a lot of really interesting political machinations in that series. So it's a good series. I just personally, because of kind of my character preferences, don't like it as much. And then she's also started branching out into thrillers recently, and I think her thrillers are also really good. I tend to be somebody who really prefers or values character-driven kind of stories. So for me, seeing romance authors like Nalini Singh, also like Alyssa Cole recently, transitioning into thrillers is something I love to see, because it means that they tend to bring those same sort of character-driven sensibilities to their work in mystery thriller. So I've enjoyed her work there as well. So that's a little bit about our author in question, Queen Nalini. I have to say, I love her name, Nalini Singh. Just all those E noises I find very like pleasing to my ear. I'm planning on reaching out to her publicist to see if maybe I can get an interview with her on here. So I'm hoping. We'll see how that goes. But that's a little background about her. And now we're going to transition to a summary of the series for those of you who have not read it, or those of you who have read the series and just need a refresher. And as I said, I purposely have not started my reread yet at the time of this recording. So I've done my homework and I'm using my memory, but I may get a couple of things wrong as we go along. So we'll correct that as we go. Just bear that in mind. Okay, so the Psy-Changeling world is a series that's set in an alternative version of Earth. So it's our world, but different. And in this version of our world, there are three races. There are humans, there are changelings who can shapeshift into different kinds of animals, and then there are the Psy who have these different kinds of psychic mental abilities. And we'll talk more about what each of these kind of character groups' deal is here more in a minute, but those are the three races. The Psy have been the race that has been sort of dominating on the global stage since the beginning of something that is called silence that was instituted in 1979. We'll talk more about that in a minute, but it's been about 100 years since then. So the series starts in 2079. And basically, we're kind of joining the story at a moment where there is a lot of kind of upheaval happening and power balances are starting to shift. So, the beginning of the storyline is focusing on these different sort of revolutionary movements that are changing up the way things have been going up until that point. So, in our first novel, which is called Slave to Sensation, when we join that, we've got the Psy who are sort of dominating for about the last 100 years, and they've been doing this through something called silence. So, silence is basically this kind of protocol that the Psy have instituted on themselves. And actually, maybe I should pause here and give you a rundown of exactly kind of what the deal is with each of these groups. And this is coming directly from Nalini Singh's website. So she says the Psy have phenomenal mental abilities from telepathy to telekinesis, psychometry to foresight. So there are Psy who can read minds incredibly strongly. There are Psy who can teleport. There are Psy who can move things with their mind. There are Psy who are gifted at medical healing. And there are Psy who can see the future. They have all these different mental abilities, and those abilities are designated with a letter and then Psy. So, for instance, if you are a medical Psy, you would be an M Psy. So, they have these abilities, but she says those gifts come with a price. They drive the Psy to insanity and murderous violence. The Psy are cold, detached, and do not have relationships based in emotion anymore because of silence. And the most powerful among them are called cardinals. And cardinals are identified by their distinctive eyes that look like the night sky. So they're white stars on black. So the cardinals are the most powerful version of Psy, but every Psy has sort of a designation given to them. They're tested for how strong their mental ability is. And they are also, and so you will see Psy that are referred to as like, I don't know, like a 7.1 telepath, whatever. And they usually have one primary gift, but sometimes they will also have sort of like a weaker gift that they also have. So maybe you're a cardinal medical Psy, but you have like a 4.1 telepathy power. And the 4.1, like the scale is sort of like the Richter scale, like it grows exponentially with every point. So cardinals are incredibly powerful. So that's kind of what the deal with the Psy is. And so silence. So as Nalini says, you have these mental abilities, but they can make you incredibly unstable. So 100 years ago, the Psy Council, who are sort of the overall rulers of the Psy people, realized that they had a lot of basically serial killers in their midst who were driven insane because they just couldn't control their like incredibly strong psychic abilities while they were just trying to live life. So the idea behind silence is that you learn this protocol as a child to shut down all of your emotion, which keeps the more unstable Psy from becoming murderous. And it allows all of the Psy to focus on their gifts without hurting anybody. And it essentially, the idea is that you are driving out the inefficiencies of messy human emotion is kind of the idea. So this has allowed them to become incredibly powerful, but sort of at the expense of having any feelings, emotions, family connections, anything. So that's the Psy. And then the second race are the Changelings. And so the Changelings are think your classical kind of like werewolf situation. They have two forms, human and animal. And Nalini Singh's website says they are at home in both forms. Some changelings are dominant, others are more submissive. Major changeling groups in the series include leopards, wolves, bears, water-based changelings, and falcons. There's other kinds of wares, but those are the ones we've kind of seen a lot of so far. They are as emotional as the Psy are cold. They are passionately devoted to their mates and blood loyal to their packs and clans. Changelings are physically powerful and as dangerously intelligent. An alpha changeling can go toe-to-toe with a cardinal Psy and not blink. So basically, they have a different kind of supernatural ability. But both of these abilities are based in science. So, like, this is not a world where it's magic that is giving these different races power. It is science. So, for instance, all of the Psy, because they don't care about emotion anymore, they've also become very focused on trying to essentially like breed stronger and stronger beings with psychic abilities. So they usually don't even have sexual relations to create children. They basically do all of their kind of family formation through these different contracts and then like through kind of like artificial insemination. So basically, like there are families, but they don't have the same kind of like emotional connections. And like I said, they're very focused on sort of like genetically perfecting their race. And then changelings, it's also kind of understood to be a genetic thing. So it is passed, like, you know, you can definitely, changelings can marry humans and their offspring could have like different kind of genetic components based on how, you know, those different kinds of genes interact with each other. I should mention that the third race are humans who are just like you and me. And Nalini Singh's website says, however, they are caught in the midst of a power struggle between the Psy and the changelings. At the beginning of the series, humans are considered the weakest of the three races, but as the series continues, we discover they have a critical role to play. And then it also mentions this thing called the Human Alliance, which I'll talk about here in a minute. So those are kind of the people at play. So at the beginning of the series, the Psy, they've been living under silence for 100 years. They are dominating on the world stage, but they can be matched by the changelings. The reason that they haven't been challenged very much in the last 100 years by the changelings is that the changelings are divided into those different packs, and they have been in a lot of sort of inter-pack like territorial wars for the last 100 years that have pretty much calmed down by the beginning of the series. So because they don't have sort of like a centralized governing force the way that the Psy have the Psy Council, they have a harder time sort of joining together to challenge the Psy on a large scale. The changelings cannot be controlled by Psy, really, which we'll talk more about, I think, as the series goes on, because I think that introduces some interesting themes. But humans can be controlled mentally by the Psy. So the humans don't, like, there's some humans who have problems with the changelings. Like there's basically some like racism towards changelings from humans and vice versa. There's a little bit of that, but there's a lot more intermarrying and sort of like commingling between changelings and humans. Humans don't sort of distrust changelings writ large the way they do the Psy, because the Psy have been like systematically like stealing humans' ideas and then making them forget they ever had them and like manipulating them in business deals and like screwing them over basically in the way that the changelings haven't. So there are some humans who are wanting to come together also to kind of push back on how dominating the Psy have been. So as the series begins, we've got the changelings finally calming down from a lot of their inter-territory squabbling, and they are becoming more powerful. Humans are starting to kind of coalesce under this to various degrees under either the Human Alliance or just generally wanting to kind of push back against Psy dominance. The other thing that's happening is that the Psy themselves are starting to have sort of inter-race discord, because silence is not as perfect as they would have other people believe. So outwardly to the rest of the world, the official party line the Psy have is that every single Psy has achieved perfect silence, meaning that they have achieved perfect emotionlessness. So that's kind of the united front they are presenting. However, within the Psy, and I should at this point mention that the Psy are all connected through something called the Psy net. So part of having these psychic powers is that you need biofeedback from other beings with those psychic abilities, and it forms this sort of mental network, which I'll try to find a description of it, but it's kind of the way it's described is almost like the night sky, and each Psy is a different star, and they all can see one another, and they all have mental feedback with each other. They also are collectively storing all of their shared knowledge into this sort of psychic space. And so there's constantly news floating around in this psychic network. It sounds very nebulous when I'm describing it. I think Nalini Singh actually does a really good job of sort of like giving you concrete visualizations of what she's trying to describe here that I am probably not doing as good of a job of. But basically, when you were first born, if you were Psy, you instantly have to connect to the Psy network, or else your brain sort of just like short circuits and you'll die. So all the Psy are connected to each other in this space. But they are also, if they just, part of what drives them, that can drive them insane, is that there's so much information that they can't process it all. So you also have to learn to develop these essential like mental shields. And there are different Psy who are like specialized in that, whatever. Okay. So in the Psy net, it looks like, with everybody's shields up, that everybody is perfectly emotionless. However, behind those shields, there are a lot of them that actually are having emotions, but they have no tools. Like, either they want to be silent, but they can't maintain it, and they're trying to keep anybody from knowing that they can't maintain it, because if the Psy Council finds out that you have broken silence, they will, I forget if they kill you, or they will at minimum put you essentially in like a mental institution and you'll never get out. So I think they maybe like lobotomize people. I don't know. We'll find this out as I begin my reread. But like, it's really bad if people find out you've broken silence, because the Psy Council will come and take you. So there are some people who are trying to not break silence, but they are anyway. And then there are other people who want to break silence because they basically feel like this bargain of having zero emotion is not worth the consequences. So silence is not perfect within the Psy net, but outwardly everybody thinks that they are still all emotionless, whatever. So those are all the different revolting forces, basically. You've got within the Psy, there's this upheaval happening. There's all of these political machinations happening within the Psy Council. Some of them want to maintain silence. Some of them want to break it for themselves, but not let anybody else break it. Some of them want to totally like just get rid of silence altogether and start something new. So you have that happening. You've got the changelings, who have always resented how dominant the Psy are on the political stage, but they, up until now, have not been able to do anything about it. But now that things are calming down, they're forming all of these business relationships with the Psy, and they're forming business and sort of like interpack treaties with each other. So one of the biggest kind of shifts is that two of the most powerful packs in the world have been fighting each other for a long time in California. There is one called the Dark River Pack, which is a pack of leopards who are based in San Francisco. And then there is a pack called the Snow Dancer Pack, which are wolves, and they are basically the rest of California. However, both of them have these kind of young new leaders, and they have formed at the beginning of the series like a tentative, like, they're working towards having an alliance. Like, they're at least got a detente, and they are working on kind of working together. So this is really upsetting the balance of power, because they are both incredibly, like, they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. So that's happening. The Psy net itself. So there's people who are rebelling against silence within the Psy, and then the Psy net itself has become incredibly unstable. We learn this more and more as the books go on, and the Psy net itself is threatening to basically like break apart. And if that happens, like, millions of Psy will die because they are reliant on it to like have this biofeedback. So that's happening. And then the humans are also like, there's these like kind of extremist groups who are trying to essentially like think sort of like white nationalism, but like humans. it's that kind of an idea. And then there are other humans who are basically just like, hey, like we're tired of, like, not as extreme, but like we want to find ways to have more kind of abilities to be more assertive in world politics. So anyway, I think that covers sort of like what the world is like and kind of the premise of the series. Because so I've been talking a lot about the kind of speculative aspect of this, but the other piece of this is that it is a romance. And so every book is a different couple getting together. And basically, each book is a couple getting together and furthering the overall plot of how, like, what's going to happen with the Psy, how the changelings are or are not going to, learn to work together better. So that's like the macro plot. And then the micro plots are these romances. And usually these romances are between different species. And that creates just a lot of inherent tension. Like the first 3 books, at least, actually, I think most of maybe the first 4 or 5 are a Psy and a changeling becoming mates. One thing I should mention is that there is a version of fated mate in this series with changelings. It's not the traditional version though of a fated mate. It's not like you instantly see someone and you instantly are mates. She does do that later in the series. It's an interesting variant, but mostly it's like you meet somebody and you have this inclination that they could be your mate. And this idea of the mating dance, which is essentially like a courtship period where you both are like accepting that you're going to be mates, ensues. So there is some level, and we do see some situations where mating dances don't work out. So it's a kind of fated mate, but not a perfect one anyway. Most of these early books are the changelings who are hyper emotional and hyper driven by passion, and who, once they find a fated mate, like that's something to be celebrated. That's their drive. And then their kind of fated mates, or the people that they at least have an inclination could become their fated mate, are these Psy who have no emotion, right? So like you've got conflict inherently baked into the setup. And then as the series goes on, there's a lot of different variations. There are Psys getting with other Psys, which are some of my favorites, I'm going to be honest with you. There are changelings getting with other changelings. There are Psy and human, or changeling and human. Like, there are a lot of different variations. And I think that part of what keeps this series moving forward is that Nalini Singh has found a lot of different conflicts within this world she set up, which I think speaks to how well conceptualized this world is, because it does lend itself to a lot of different types of conflict. The only other thing I should mention in terms of things you need to know about the world, it is 2079, so there are also some like technological advancements that you see in this series. They're not drastic, but they are there. So like you do have a kind of version of a flying car. They do have like much more advanced medical technology. People do seem to be living a lot longer, like not indefinitely, but like it's not unusual to encounter people who are like in their hundreds. So also just a note there. That's sort of the overall world as we know it. So now transitioning into my pitch of why you should read it. Okay, so first, as we've talked about, this world setup is really interesting and cool. Like the actual world, I think she does a really good job of describing. Like the world building itself, I think is really well done, especially for a series of this kind that doesn't always value world building. I think she clearly does, and she's clearly put a lot of thought into how she's set up her world. So that's cool. The political machinations of the series are so fun. So if you are somebody who that's like one of your main things you like in kind of a speculative type series, is sort of okay, this person's trying to assassinate this person, and this person's trying to get this person to be on their side, so they're going to blackmail them, and like those kinds of macro plots. If you like that, this series has some of my favorite versions of that. The actual romances I do find to be pretty satisfying. I will tell you, I think when we are in these earlier books, I'll say, I do think some of the romances at this point are starting to feel a little dated from the earlier books, because it was written in 2006. And in genre fiction time, 15 years is an eon. like a lot changes in terms of sort of the conventional tropes or sort of like the types of conflicts that are or are not acceptable. Like a lot changes in romance in 15 years. So I do think some of, especially the earlier books, the romances feel a little dated. I'm sure we'll talk about that. Some of them are fantastic. Like book 3, Judd is still a series, like fans of this series, we still talk about Judd. Judd is like one of the book 3 is one of the best books in the series. So it's not all of them. Some of the romances I still think feel great from that era, but all that being said, I do think that the character work is really good. And if you can kind of go along with some of the dated elements of it in terms of some of the alpha, what I would call an alpha hole, the alphaness of some of the earlier heroes. I think that the romances really are very satisfying. Like I said, there's a lot of kind of juicy tension built into why they can or can't be together. There's some sexy scenes, which I think are usually done pretty well. Like the actual romances of these books are very satisfying for people who enjoy a romance read. I will say that probably the two things that have made this one of my most successful recommendations to people, like I have a nearly perfect track record of like, if I recommend this to somebody, they end up telling me that they really enjoyed it. If they like, I can think of one or two people I know who I recommended who didn't enjoy it, but mostly people who've gone on to read it have said like, oh, this was so fun. And it's for two qualities. One, the recurring characters and the kind of community building she does, these, especially the packs, like they just have this perfect quality of like found family. It's so nostalgic, it's so cozy. They have like this just ride or die mentality for their group, for their neighbors, for their family. And there's just such this lovely warmth to all of those kinds of found family interactions. We also have like lots of recurring characters, and I think she handles her recurring characters in a really elegant way. Sometimes I think later in series, recurring characters really just feel like fan service. They don't have a purpose of why they're there, and you just basically have them show up because everybody wants to see them. While that is true, and I do think that the transition book between the two kind of seasons of Psy-Changeling, which I guess I didn't mention, I'll come back to that, but I think that one felt that way a little bit. But overall, the recurring characters are really fun to see, and I think she finds organic ways to include them that feels well executed, in my opinion. So the character work in the series is fantastic. And then the way that she structures these books, it just is so freaking bingeable. Like you just can't put these down. I couldn't anyway when I first read them. They just fly by. They just are really propulsive reads. Like you just want to keep going. She apportions the macro plot to each book in a way that you want to keep reading because you're wanting to find out like, holy crap, like what happened to this? Like this just blew up. What are the implications of this going to be? Like you just want to keep reading for that. She also plants a lot of seeds of like, oh, it looks like maybe this person and this person might get together. So you also have that you're reading for. Like there's just something very bingeable about this series. So it's very just a fun series in terms of you'll pick it up and if you like it, you'll just want to power straight through it. So in terms of like why I think you should read this, if those things sound appealing to you, those are sort of my main selling points I give to people. And then finally, before we talk about some logistics, just themes coming into this project that I enjoy about this series and I expect we will explore further as we go along. First, I would say pretty much in every race, in each of the races, but definitely the Psy and the Changeling most prominently, you have this theme of a corrupted community moving towards a healed community. So you see this at a micro level with different things that we see with packs and with different Psy families, but just writ large. When we start the book, the Changeling community is coming out of a period of the kind of loyalty to their pack having been something that has corrupted their overall ability to get along with each other. So they become so territorial that they're killing each other. It's a bad scene. And they finally have started to learn that lesson by the time we're joining with the changelings, and they're kind of coming out of that into a more healed version of what it means to be in community, both with their own pack but also with other packs. So we're seeing them starting to have these alliances. We're seeing them starting to say, like, hey, we need to find a way to work this out that is not violent. Like, we've got to find other ways to kind of share territory. So that has been happening for the changelings, and we're kind of joining them at a point where they really are starting to heal. For the Psy, where a lot of what this series is the Psy reaching their breaking point of they have become completely corrupted as a community because their politicians are corrupt, and the way that they're controlling their community, or sort of like the rules of their community, while well intentioned at first, has totally destroyed what it means to be like a person in a lot of ways. And it's destroying them rather than allowing them to thrive. So a lot of what this series is about is the Psy learning from the changelings, but like kind of on a micro level with these different pairings. But then also that expands to be a bigger thing of the Psy learning from the changelings what it means to have a restored community. So I think that's a lot of thematically what's happening here. Also, I mean, like, guys know if you watch me at all that I love Jane Eyre, and there's just so many Jane Eyre parallels, I feel like, in this series. Like, Jane Eyre and Pride and Prejudice are sort of two of the texts of the romance genre in general, and I definitely think that paranormal / speculative fiction tends to draw more from Jane Eyre than it does kind of the Jane Austen books. So in general, that's maybe a different discussion for a different day, but I would argue that like kind of paranormal romance in general comes more from sort of the Gothic romantic tradition. So I think that's already there. But specifically, and I'm going to make an entire video essay about this at some point, one of the main themes in Jane Eyre, I would argue, is this pull between passion and duty, in the form of sort of the two main potential love interests that Jane has. So Rochester kind of representing unrestrained passion, and St. John representing sort of like complete devotion to duty. And what Jane Eyre ultimately is about, I would argue, is how you reconcile both forces within yourself that are both good, but that have to be in balance. And I think that we see this pretty like directly allegorized in this series, where the Psy represent total discipline, no emotion, pure rationality. At least they think they're being purely rational. And where that leads you. Whereas the changelings represent, or have represented in the past, pure passion of like loyalty above all else, loyalty to your family, and just like that can also lead you down a very dark path. And what this series is about is like, how do you find that balance, right? Like, how do you find the balance of like what makes being human or a person worthwhile is the fact that we can love each other and have loyalty to each other and, you know, create art and do, you know what I mean? Like the whole like Dead Poet Society of like poetry is what makes, you know, life worth living. That kind of an idea. I think that that's, you know, an important piece of what the Psy need to learn. And then the Psy also have things to teach about like how you work together for a common purpose. Like they have become unified to the point of it being like stultifying to individuals, but like they are able to be disciplined and rational, and like they are able to achieve all of these amazing like kind of technology breakthroughs, and they're able to be very powerful because they are not wholly ruled by emotion. So a lot of what this series is about is these different couples learning from each other. I would also argue that that tends to sort of be a overarching theme in romance in general, that the heroine represents the hero like learning to embrace his more soft tenderess side of himself, and the hero, you know, eliciting from the hero like him being more rational and like, anyway, that's, I think, also kind of a bigger theme in romance for at large, but I think that's very directly a metaphor in this particular series. Another kind of two sort of smaller themes that I think are definitely here, though, is this idea of like interspecies or like interracial romance. So interestingly, the Psy are radically um interracial in the sense of we would use it in our actual world. Like all they care about are trying to create children with the best abilities. So like they've almost eliminated race within themselves as we today would define it. Like they're all pretty much all Psy are intensely biracial. Like their dad may be like a Russian Nigerian and their mom might be like a Japanese Canadian. Like they are just looking purely at the DNA of like what's going to make the strongest baby. So they are all very like they don't have race in the same way that we do. So they're one, but they are very specious. Like they do not want any intermarriage with humans or changelings anymore. Like that is a corrupt. So it's like a different commentary on race, I feel like. And anyway, so I think it just introduces a lot of interesting themes around like different kinds of forms of prejudice and different kinds of conceptions of what it means to have like an quote unquote interracial romance. So I think that's an interesting theme. And then finally, 2006 was like the boom of like right before smartphones became a thing, like kind of Web 2.0. Like I think the Psynet is definitely meant to be sort of an exploration of what an explosion of informational technology does to people, and kind of an exploration thematically of like what the internet is doing to our world. So those are two sort of sub themes that I enjoy and that I see in these books. But overall, thematically, those are kind of my ideas coming into the project. And I think, I mean, I could literally sit here and talk more about this, but we're going to have, you know, however many episodes to get into specific books. But I think that gives you a sense of sort of what I love about this series, why I think it's interesting, why I think it's worth us spending hours and hours talking about it over the next however many months. So that's kind of where I'm coming into this project. And then I guess just I'll leave you guys with some logistics. So I'm envisioning posting an episode about every 2 weeks. You know, life may happen and that may not be possible, but my intention is, you know, every other week I will post an episode. They'll be going up on Tuesday mornings. I will post it on my YouTube channel. I'm in the process of getting listed with the different podcast feeds, so hopefully that will happen soon. I will have some of these that are just me. I am hoping to have some guests on. I'm working on that. So you'll hear from me. You'll hopefully also hear from some other people so that you get kind of some crosstalk happening. I always find that enjoyable in podcasts. And then I do just want to mention that these are going to be spoiler-filled episodes. So if you don't care about spoilers, I'm somebody who doesn't usually really care that much about spoilers, but I know some people really do. If you've not read the series yet and you do not want to be spoiled for it, just know these will be spoiler-filled episodes. And if you have been with me for any kind of like reading of Agatha Christie, you kind of have a sense of the types of conversations I envision us having. I do think that there'll be more of sort of like a recapping element in this than I did with Christie because I'm just going to go whole hog on spoilers. So I think that there will be a little bit more recapping, but there will also be a lot of discussion sort of the themes and whatnot. So I think that's it. I think that's our first episode. We hit, you know, kind of what we're doing, who I am, how the logistics of this will work. I think we covered most of what we needed to. Yeah, I am excited to talk to you guys about Psy-Changeling because I really do love this series. I think this will be a really fun project. I'm really excited to be trying something a little bit different than what I've been doing before, and I'm very excited to hopefully find some new fellow lovers of this series. I know that it is well loved within a lot of groups, but I always get excited when I find other people who love this series because it is, I think, a special one and it merits, I think, a lot of discussion, which is why we're even doing this. So I think that'll do it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed this first episode, and I will see you guys in 2 weeks to talk about the first book in the series, which is called Slave to Sensation by Queen Nalini Singh. Catch you guys then. Bye!